Have you ever seen arrogance so blinding that it convinces someone they are untouchable, only to watch fate pull the rug from beneath their feet in the most unexpected way? That's exactly what happened on a night that started like any other fight promotion, where people were gathered to see a famous, undefeated boxer. A man who carried himself with the kind of swagger that made headlines not for his skill alone, but for his disdain toward anyone he deemed beneath him. His fans cheered. His every move and his detractors prayed for the day he would be humbled. But none of them, not even the closest insiders in the boxing world, could have predicted that the one to bring this arrogance to its knees would be a young black girl, barely into her teenage years, someone who wasn't even supposed to be near the ring, let alone inside it. The boxer, whose ego had swelled after years of adoration, craved not only victories but spectacles, and when he noticed this girl sitting quietly in the corner of the gym one afternoon, watching the fighters train, with eyes full of silent curiosity, he saw not a human being worthy of respect, but a perfect opportunity to make himself look larger than life. "Hey, you," he called out with that smirk that always made his entourage laugh. "Why don't you come in here and show us what you've got, unless you're too scared?" The words were laced with mockery, designed not to invite her, but to trap her, to corner her into embarrassment while the cameras rolled and the gym echoed with laughter. People chuckled nervously, unsure if he was serious, but his tone left little doubt. He wanted entertainment, and he wanted it at the expense of someone he assumed could never stand against him. What he didn't realize was that by underestimating her, he had already set into motion something that would shake his very foundation. The girl, whose name was Amara, didn't flinch. She had been coming to that gym secretly after school, sometimes, sweeping floors just for the chance to watch fighters practice, her heart carrying a dream that few would take seriously. Her life hadn't been kind. She grew up in a neighborhood where survival required strength, and every day was a battle far harsher than any sanctioned fight in the ring. Yet despite the hardships, she carried herself with quiet resilience. And when the arrogant boxer singled her out, something inside her shifted from fear to resolve. The crowd waited for her to retreat, to laugh it off and run. But she stood, her small frame almost swallowed by the gym's dim lighting, and she said in a voice steady enough to silence the whispers, "I'll fight." In that moment, the air changed. No one could have predicted the storm about to unfold. A storm that would turn humiliation into triumph, arrogance into downfall, and a young girl's courage into the story people would talk about for years to come. The gym erupted into a mix of laughter, disbelief, and scattered applause, because no one could quite process the audacity of this moment. Here was a girl no taller than the boxer's shoulder, her hands unwrapped, her shoes worn down from years, of being passed from one sibling to another, standing before a man whose fists had floored professionals in under 2 rounds. His entourage roared with amusement, some pulling out their phones to record what they thought would become another viral clip of their champion mocking someone powerless. "This'll be fun," the boxer sneered, pacing the ring with exaggerated swagger, pointing to Amara as though she were an object rather than a human. "Don't worry, I won't hit you too hard. Wouldn't want anyone saying I bully little girls." His voice carried arrogance so thick it coated the air, but beneath it lay something darker, the need to humiliate, to strip another human of dignity just to feed his own ego. The trainer, torn between stopping this madness and fearing the wrath of the man who paid his salary, hesitated, his whistle dangling loosely around his neck as he muttered, "Just keep it light, all right?" But for Amara, there was no light way to face what stood before her. She wasn't thinking of embarrassment, nor was she blinded by the cameras pointed at her. She was remembering nights when her mother worked, double shifts, and still came home exhausted with barely enough to put food on the table. She remembered bullies at school who laughed at her patched clothes and teachers who overlooked her because they assumed she would never amount to anything. Most of all, She remembered the countless hours she had spent imitating the fighters she admired, shadowboxing in alleys, wrapping her hands with torn cloth, and whispering to herself that one day she would be seen. That day had come sooner than expected, though not in the way she had imagined. She stepped into the ring barefoot, the cool canvas pressing against her skin, her heart thundering not with fear, but with anticipation. The crowd jeered, some booing, others egging the boxer on, treating her like a sacrificial lamb. But when she lifted her fists, awkward but determined, a hush settled over the room, because there was something in her eyes, something unyielding, something fierce, that momentarily stripped the laughter from their throats. The boxer noticed it too, though he shrugged it off, bouncing lightly on his toes, throwing a few playful jabs in the air to show how relaxed he was. "Ready, sweetheart?" he taunted, lowering his guard to mock her stance. But before anyone could blink, Amara's fist shot forward with surprising speed, grazing his chin just enough to snap his head back and silence the room entirely. Gasps rippled through the gym, phones dropped, and for the first time in years, the boxer felt not the sting of pain, but the sting of humiliation, because that punch wasn't supposed to land. It wasn't supposed to be real. His smirk faltered, and beneath the overhead lights, the arrogance in his eyes flickered into something that looked dangerously close to fear. He clenched his jaw, blood rushing to his face, and for a brief moment he wondered if this fight, this joke he had orchestrated, was about to unravel in ways he could never control. The silence after that first punch was deafening, the kind of silence that carries the weight of disbelief, as if every single person in the gym had collectively forgotten how to breathe. The boxer stood frozen for a fraction of a second, his mouth tightening as though he wanted to laugh it off, but his pride wouldn't let him. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, and that tiny flicker of doubt he had felt was instantly drowned beneath a tidal wave of rage. "You think that was something?" he barked, his voice booming louder than before, desperate to reclaim control of the room. His entourage quickly joined in with forced laughter, shouting things like, "She got lucky," and "Show her what real power looks like." But their laughter sounded hollow, the unease still lingering in their throats. Amara, however, didn't flinch. Her chest rose and fell quickly from adrenaline, but her eyes remained locked on him, her small fists clenched tightly, her body remembering every movement she had practiced alone in dark corners where no one could see. She didn't have years of professional training, but she had instinct, grit, and the raw hunger of someone who had survived battles far more brutal than anything a ring could offer. The boxer lunged forward with a series of light jabs meant to intimidate, to toy with her, his fists blurring with speed, but Amara ducked beneath the first, sidestepped the second, and though the third grazed her shoulder, she countered with a quick hook that clipped his ribs. The sound of knuckle against muscle was sharp, echoing louder than it should have in the stunned silence. Gasps escaped the audience again, and the boxer's face twisted, no longer amused. His pride had been wounded twice now, once publicly, and this time with an undeniable blow that everyone had seen. Rage coursed through him, his arrogance pushing him into reckless territory, and he began to swing harder, faster, the kind of punches that had put down trained fighters. But with each wild strike, Amara seemed to grow calmer, her movements sharper, her focus narrowing until she was no longer the barefoot girl mocked in whispers, but a fighter in her own right. She darted, back, then forward, slipping between his punches with a precision that startled even the trainer watching from the sidelines. The phone's recording shook as their owners couldn't believe what they were capturing. The boxer's breathing grew heavier, his frustration mounting with each missed shot, while Amara's confidence surged, her punches landing with rhythm. Short, precise, stinging like the reminder that arrogance always forgets. No one is untouchable forever. The crowd, once laughing, began to murmur, their cheers shifting, their eyes wide as they realized the impossible was unfolding before them. And in that moment, for the first time in his career, the boxer wasn't just fighting to dominate, he was fighting to survive humiliation. What happened next didn't just feel like a sparring match gone wrong. It felt like a storm breaking loose, inside four ropes. A storm where pride clashed with persistence, arrogance collided with resilience, and where every strike carried more than just the weight of flesh against flesh. It carried the echo of every insult, every dismissal, every laugh that had been thrown Amara's way since the day she was old enough to dream. The boxer, drenched, in sweat now, his broad shoulders heaving, looked nothing like the untouchable champion who had entered the ring so smugly moments earlier. His jabs had lost their crispness, his footwork sloppy from anger clouding his technique, while Amara seemed to sharpen with each passing second, her body moving with the rhythm of someone who had learned survival the hard way. Each sidestep reminded him that he could bleed. Each counterpunch reminded him that dominance wasn't guaranteed, and each time she looked him in the eye with that unwavering glare, he felt his carefully built image begin to fracture. The crowd's energy shifted wildly, half of them still rooted for him, shouting his name with desperation, while the other half, unable to deny what their eyes witnessed, began whispering Amara's name like a secret chant. The trainer at ringside leaned forward, gripping the ropes so tightly his knuckles turned white, torn between stepping in to stop the madness or letting it play out, because deep down, he knew he was witnessing history. The boxer tried to use his size, lunging with a heavy right meant to end it, but Amara ducked low, her small body slipping beneath his guard, and with a sudden burst of speed, she struck him square in the gut. The air rushed out of him in a guttural gasp, his body folding slightly as if the blow had stolen not only his breath, but his certainty. The gym erupted, screams bouncing off the walls, phones shaking in trembling hands as the impossible began to take form right before their eyes. The boxer staggered back, clutching his abdomen, his pride more wounded than his body, but he forced a grin, blood beginning to bead at the corner of his lip as he muttered through clenched teeth. "That's cute, but you're done." He lunged again, faster this time, his fists like hammers, but his aim was wild, and Amara, small and agile, slipped through his swings, her movements like whispers in a storm. For every 3 punches he threw, she landed one clean shot, each, one snapping his head or rattling his ribs, drawing louder gasps from the crowd. The humiliation began to weigh heavier than his gloves, his mind clouded not with strategy, but with the desperate need to end her. But the more desperate he became, the clearer Amara's path seemed. She wasn't just defending herself anymore, she was rising. Every strike she threw was a declaration that she belonged here, that she wasn't invisible, that no amount of mockery could silence the strength she carried. By the time another of her hooks clipped his jaw and sent him stumbling, the laughter was gone. The arrogance that had filled the room minutes before had evaporated, replaced with awe, disbelief, and a gnawing realization among the crowd. The champion wasn't in control anymore. By now, the atmosphere inside the gym had transformed into something electric, almost otherworldly, as if everyone present realized they were no longer just spectators, but witnesses to a moment that would be retold long after the sweat on the canvas had dried. The arrogant boxer, who had strutted into the ring believing he could turn a young black girl into nothing more than the punchline of a joke, now found himself gasping for air, his lungs burning, his eyes wild with the panic of a man who felt control slipping through his fingers. Every drop of sweat that rolled down his face seemed to carry the weight of disbelief, as though his body couldn't reconcile the reality that he was being outmaneuvered, outpaced, and, most humiliating of all, outfought by someone he had written off before the first bell. His entourage, who had once jeered and laughed with every mocking word he spat, now stood silent, their phones still recording, but their faces pale with confusion. Some even lowered their cameras, ashamed to capture the downfall of the man they idolized, while others kept filming, knowing deep down that history doesn't care for pride, only truth. And the truth was undeniable. Amara was not just surviving, she was winning. Every time she slipped beneath his punches, every time she landed a jab that snapped his head back, every time she stood tall despite his towering figure, she peeled back another layer of his arrogance until all that was left was raw desperation. Her movements, though unrefined, carried the rhythm of years of silent training, the kind that comes from watching, learning, and practicing when no one believes in you. She had studied fighters from the shadows, mimicking their footwork with chalk outlines on the pavement, learning the timing of a jab from echoes of gloves hitting bags, teaching herself resilience through the bruises life handed her daily. And now all of that hidden preparation was pouring out in a torrent he could not stop. The boxer tried everything, cutting off the ring, throwing combinations, even feigning weakness to lure her in, but she saw through it all, responding not with fear but with instinct. A quick jab, a sharp hook, a slip to the left, and suddenly, he looked like the amateur, while she looked like the one who had been born for the sport. The crowd began chanting her name openly now. "Amara! Amara!" The sound rolling like thunder across the gym walls, growing louder with each exchange. The trainer, shaking his head in disbelief, muttered under his breath, "She's actually doing it. She's breaking him." And he was right, because the boxer's face, once the mask of untouchable dominance, was now flushed with exhaustion, swollen where her fists had found their mark, his grin long gone, replaced by clenched teeth and narrowed eyes. He swung again, reckless, desperate. But Amara met him with a counter so swift and sharp it rattled the crowd to their core. A clean, unflinching uppercut that snapped his head back and sent him staggering to the ropes. Gasps turned into screams, as the unthinkable suddenly felt not just possible, but inevitable. The arrogant champion, once feared and adored, was teetering on the edge of defeat at the hands of the very person he had sought to humiliate. And in that breathless pause before the final storm, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether the giant would fall. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the arrogant boxer leaned against the ropes, his chest heaving, sweat dripping, like rain from his battered face, while Amara stood in the center of the ring, her small frame straightened, her fists still raised, her eyes burning with the fire of someone who had already won in her heart long before this fight began. The crowd, electrified and disbelieving, leaned forward as if the entire gym had become one living organism, every breath synchronized in anticipation of what would happen next. The boxer, humiliated and desperate, spat blood to the side and roared with a fury that sounded less like confidence and more like the cry of a man drowning in his own pride. He charged, fists swinging wildly, abandoning every ounce of technique that had once made him a champion, and in that moment the story shifted completely, because Amara did not flinch, did not retreat, did not surrender to fear. Instead, she stepped forward with the calm precision of someone who had carried pain on her back her entire life and learned how to turn it into strength. His punch cut through the air, missing by inches as she dipped beneath it, and with a single motion that seemed to hold the weight of every insult, every dismissal, every laugh she had ever endured, she unleashed a punch so fierce, so perfectly placed, that when it connected with his jaw, the sound cracked through the gym like thunder. His body stiffened, his eyes rolled, and then, like a fallen giant, he collapsed to the canvas with a crash that shook the floor beneath everyone's feet. For a moment, silence reigned. No one moved, no one spoke, no one dared to believe what they had just seen. And then, like a tidal wave, the gym exploded with screams, cheers, and chants of her name. "Amara! Amara! Amara!" echoing so loudly it felt as though the walls themselves shook in recognition of what had just happened. The trainer dropped his whistle, his hands covering his face in disbelief, while the entourage, who had laughed moments earlier, stood frozen, their mouths hanging open, their loyalty shattered by the sight of their untouchable idol sprawled unconscious at the feet of the very girl he had mocked. Amara, breathing heavily but standing tall, looked down at him, not with arrogance, but with quiet dignity, the kind of dignity that spoke louder than any insult ever could. She had not just beaten him, she had rewritten the story, transforming a setup meant to humiliate her into a triumph that would be remembered for generations. That night, the unthinkable happened. The arrogant champion fell, and a young black girl, once overlooked and dismissed, rose to claim not just victory in the ring, but victory in the hearts of everyone who had ever been told they were too small, too weak, or too unworthy. And as the roar of the crowd wrapped around her like an embrace, Amara knew she had proven something far greater than her strength. She had proven that courage, when carried with conviction, can topple even the mightiest giants.